it's not about changing someone's mind on theology. It's just about learning how to love your gay child and seeing things differently instead of condemning and using Bible verses. And so it was just a way to help parents who are really struggling with this, that then in turn helps kids or LGBTQ adults, even anybody who's going through, yes.
In this episode, we talked to a good friend of mine, Sharon.
And you're there at the thing, and I'm like, I just went to the conference the day before. I'm telling you about it after we see the movie at the film festival. And I'm like, yeah, and tomorrow Andy Stanley is supposed to be giving this historical
talk about
sermon.
Synchronicity, the film 1946, and Andy Stanley.
How do things always come back to Andy Stanley? Share this with your friends and everyone else on your
So Andy Stanley, that's one. Okay, so I kind of had a view of. Okay, so they played this. I don't know if you've seen it, but they played this sermon at a church, right? They played the sermon at a church where he was talking about the gay person that's crying out to God, and they serve at the church and they do so many things, but yet the church still looks down upon them. But what he was trying to portray in his sermon was that the LGBTQ people are important in the church and God loves them. So I'm like, well, what does that mean? Can you elaborate more? So it was, it was sort of like, it was a very gray perspective from him. So
I love you use the word gray.
Yeah.
I love that you use the word gray. I'll tell you why. Because I was literally, as you called me, I was literally sitting here thinking, trying to explain why this was relevant. Why, I was trying to explain why this is important. She's like, why does everything, why do you keep talking about Andy Stanley? And I'm like, I don't know. Every time I turn around, I guess it's God. Every time I turn around, I have conversations with people, they're bringing Andy Stanley up. I had this conversation with Rocky, and I started asking her, why did you make this movie? Tell me why you created this movie. And freaking Andy Stanley comes up. I have a conversation with Sam, the politician.
Where you were like, yep, this is what I'm going to do. The only thing I really want to talk about is synchronicity.
Yeah, it was May of 2018. I was having a pool party at a house I was renting in LA at the time, and with my church friends. And that was a group that I had started to do. It was at this new church that I was going to, where they want to get to know the community. So it's a guided book course by Andy Stanley called Starting Point. And I went into this group, and on chapter 2, week 2, they talk about sin. And I came out to this group and I said, what you call sin, I don't call sin. And that started a whole conversation, and the group was wonderful. It was a very diverse group, and the conversations were blooming. And that's where I learned about how to use the Bible for an exegesis, which means taking the scripture and looking at the past scripture and other texts to learn interpret what the scriptures mean and things like that. And so it was fascinating. And then somebody in that class told me about some verses that may or may not affirm homosexuality. And I never thought of it before. And the verses were a little bit more of an interpretation and not necessarily super concrete on it, but it opened my eyes to affirming theology. And being a filmmaker, I really wanted to be able to utilize my gift to be able to express confirmation for a queer person, especially anybody who's been persecuted through religion, like I was. So I am a queer Christian who grew up in the church. My dad is a non-denominational minister. And as you can imagine, those things just don't mix like oil and water. And so after learning all of these things and rereading the Bible as an adult and challenging the church, really pushing back on them, I said, I'm going to make a documentary on affirming theology to affirm my identity with my non-affirming parents. I didn't really think it would work. My parents, I don't know, will ever be swayed on gay people shouldn't be in gay relationships and things like that. They may have now moved where you could be born gay, but you can't act on it kind of thing. And I'm like, I'm going to make a documentary about this because it'll help me so much. And I know it'll help so many people. A couple months later, I took a class on homosexuality in the Bible at Toluca Lake United Methodist Church. And that's where I learned of the two Greek words, malakoi and arsenokoitai, that had been combined to mean homosexual. But I didn't really know anything about the 1946 or the mistranslation. I'm just like, what are these two Greek words? What do they mean? Oh, it's about an act, not a group of people. It's a word, and words that have a connotation of, all those themes. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, that's just an amazing concept. This is interesting. And in that class, somebody told me about Kathy Boldock. And I went home and watched Kathy Boldock. And she does this amazing job of looking at 2,000 years of human sexuality seen through multiple lenses. As we know more, how does our history change? How does our language change? Do we do better? How do we do as society? And so what's going on in human sexuality, in politics, religion, in medicine, in psychology, all of these sciences, to understand what we knew of heterosexual and homosexual, and could the Bible have been mistranslated, or is it really talking about homosexuals? She wanted to ask those questions and release the LGBTQ community from religious oppression. So I was just like, well, this woman's amazing and her work is amazing. And to talk about synchronicity, I then learned, this is again, it was September of 2018, I binge watched her. She was coming into LA in October of 2018, and my parents were coming into town the same weekend. Now, my parents have only visited me in LA twice, and this is one of the times, in the same, within a 5-week period. So I'm over the moon. I'm already going to make a documentary about affirming theology. I'm like, why don't I just film this? So I put together a film crew. I asked permission of my parents, the church, Kathy. At that time, she was working with Ed. I didn't know Ed's story until we went and showed up, but got permission from everyone and just showed up and filmed. So what you see in the movie where I'm like, and I just started filming, is so true. And in that conference, that was when my dad and I learned simultaneously about the 1946 mistranslation, about Reverend David, who wrote the letters in 1959. And he's alive. Kathy and Ed had just found him. It took them 9 months of deep digging to find the real man who wrote these historical documents. So all of this is going down and I'm getting chills. And I'm like, this is the documentary. Because this isn't my opinion, this isn't my interpretation, this is a tangible evidence, a tangible mistranslation that we can trace through these historical documents to then a real challenge by a real man who's alive, who's a retired minister in Canada. It couldn't get any better. And then Ed, who was working with Kathy, who was also at that conference, his story, as we see in the film, is wonderful, where he is a gay Christian who, like me, was in a Kathy Boldock conference and learned the word homosexual wasn't in the Bible until 1946. And we're like, what? That wasn't that long ago. Finding that very hard to believe. So Ed started to invest in Bibles, dictionaries, lexicons, and his book collection and Bible collection is very impressive. Commentaries, the 9, all of it, And so he woos Kathy into a friendship relationship. Let's dig into this together. And and that's how they started working together. So Kathy was the one that discovered the 1946 mistranslation, but she didn't go any further, as she says in the film. It was Ed, through his searching, that discovered that the archives of the translation committee were at Yale. And so he gets a library card. Kathy's like, I'm going with you. And that's when they made their discovery. That was the summer of 2017. So a year before I said I was going to make a documentary, and a year and some months, before I met them and saw this live conference. So they just found Reverend David. Kathy called him and, is this you? Don't hang up, and he's like, hello? Yes, I did write those letters, as you can imagine, sitting at home in Canada at 9 a.m. And so they then mentioned at that conference that they were going to bring Reverend David to the Queer Christian Fellowship Conference in January 2019, which is only a couple months away. And I'm like, I have to be there. I have to film this. So I called Kathy Boldock after the conference and I said, hi, I was the filmmaker. My dad was the one who asked the question. She, of course, remembered us. And I said, I really want to do a long format documentary on your story and these letters. And David, may I come to Chicago and film you guys and do a documentary on you? And Kathy looked at me and she said, no. And I was like, oh, that wasn't the response and she, I don't know if you know Kathy, and she's a strictly business. I mean, she's definitely lovely and she opens up and she's bubbly and she's fun, but she is she's a woman that knows what she wants and she's not afraid to tell you. Yeah. So she was just like, no, not going to happen. And I was like, So then I was like, okay, let me work on Ed. So I call Ed, who lives in Long Beach. So he's like 45 minutes away. And I was like, hey, Ed, hi, we met. I love your story. I'd love to come see your book collection. Do you mind if I come over and film? And da, da, da. And Ed says no. And then I find out that Ed really just said no because he wanted to get a haircut. I was like, get a haircut. Everything will be fine. He just wanted to make sure he looked nice. He's in typical, LGBTQ, gay guy. I don't know. I'm just kidding, making a little joke there. But I was like, get a haircut. Everything's going to be fine. And he did. And we came over. And then I don't know if he spoke with Kathy or Kathy had a change of heart, but she then said, okay, you can come and film us. And then I started investing, and I'm the first investor, not only, spiritually and relationally, but financially. And so I bought plane tickets, asked for volunteers to help me. And it was 3 women on the team that were not cinematographers, were not sound people, were not, and I'm like, I just bought this equipment and I'm a producer. I don't really know how to work this stuff. So we're like YouTube University the night before, I paid for everything. The conference, we got a booth so that we could meet people. And I asked a friend to put together a trailer just to have something to show at our booth that's big. So don't judge me, but I bought a TV and then returned it in Chicago where the conference was. But we bought a 52-inch TV, and had a friend make a trailer that was just visuals with dramatic music that drew people in and got people to the booth to just talk about this documentary that we were creating. And of course, they got to see us there when Reverend David came. He came out for the first time publicly and told his story with Kathy. And we see that wonderful scene in the film where she's like, hello, David. And she's like going like this, and the crowd is cheering. And he's like, this is wonderful. And he's just so adorable. And it was at that conference, and there were 1,500 people in Chicago at that conference. And I'm like, we're going to meet somebody who's as passionate about this as I am. Yeah. And somebody's going to be able to help us. Now, I thought at the time we were going to find investors that we would have to pay back. But once I met this couple at the Queer Christian Fellowship Conference, Todd and Teresa Silver, they had just done and finished Daniel Carslake's second film on this topic for They Know Not What They Do. His first film was For the Bible Tells Me So, which won Sundance earlier, 2012, I think it was, and was instrumental in this theme of homophobia in the church and gay kids and parents and things like that. And so I was like, he's a mentor. I mean, he's an icon. He's the guy in this arena. And so they said that they would talk with him, they could help, and all this stuff. But through Daniel Carslake vetting me for them to see if they could give me if I was a good person to invest in, which is smart of them. Daniel and I had a lovely conversation, which turned in why don't you be our executive producer, mentor me through this. That'll make Todd and Teresa feel comfortable with the gift and the investment, which was really a donation at that time, because he taught me that we could and qualified because of the type of film. We need the money to make the movie, but it's not necessarily documentaries don't really make money. It's hard to make money in this arena, and so they're more of a journalistic category, and we qualify for fiscal sponsorship, which means we can work with a 501c3 that then gets audited for their projects, and we obviously have to account for our receipts, and we then we're an LLC and get taxed, but we don't have to pay anybody back because our donors can now give to a 501c3 and get the tax write-off, and then they're a pass-through company that affords filmmakers like us the opportunity to make the movie. And I was like, wait, what? And there's been a lot of work around these types of films to benefit producers who really get the short end of the stick, and streamers will want to pick it up for $1. And it's like, I put 5 years of my life into this movie. What do you mean you're going to give us $1? And so there's an organization called, which I didn't know about. They taught me all of this because meeting the right people, being in the right space, finding that synchronicity. Yeah. There's an organization called the Independent Documentary Association, and they've been working for over 20 years to build tools, resources, and now the new thing is impact campaigns, where we can still continue to fundraise to be able to make the movie available in areas that need it the most. So right now, we did just get a grant to work on getting our book in order, our workbook, to connect with the film, to help advance the tools and then give people more resources. So that's kind of the origin story. Now from there, that was within a year, and we were in Seattle 2019, September. So almost a year to our first day of filming is when we were able to get Todd and Teresa's gift, be able to reimburse me for all the money. I put $32,000 by that point in like a couple, months of my own money, which I don't have. It's credit debt, to be able to get that wiped, and pay Daniel to be our mentor and get us on the road to Seattle, where we filmed a lot of the third act of the film and my dad's interviews and things like that. So it just was synchronicity. It can't be,
I'm actually blown away. I was blown away from the beginning. There's so many things that I would just love to unpack, but for the sake of time, I have to go right back to the beginning, to how we ended up at Andy Stanley's church. And you mentioned that you went to an Andy Stanley church, and that's the Bible study that got you thinking about this topic in the beginning.
Yeah, it wasn't an Andy Stanley church. He is an author as well. So this church used one of his books for this Bible study, this discussion group.
So that's very interesting to me, because the last person that I interviewed told me that he actually came out because of something that Andy Stanley said, or he said he had the strength. And so I think to myself, this is interesting synchronicity, where I have two stories now where somehow this is linked. Do you mind telling the story of how we ended up at that church? Can we talk about that? Just that.
So we were in Atlanta the same weekend, talk about synchronicity, that Andy Stanley's church. Now he has a main campus that he shows up to, and then there are a lot of different branches. I think there are about 35,000, 40,000 members in the Atlanta area that go to these different churches, and they stream to the other churches if you're not in the main church. But at the main campus, they were holding an unconditional. It was called Unconditional Conference, and it was designed around a book called Embracing the Journey, written by Greg and Lynn McDonald, who I've been familiar with for a while. I've read their book, I've taken interviews with them, I've interviewed them just to meet them, and they're donors on our film. But they have an LGBTQ child, and they go through their experience of living with an LGBTQ kid and being Christian, and how does that mix? So they designed this conference to not necessarily like where the Reformation Project is working to affirm LGBTQ people through theology. The Unconditional Conference is designed to, it's not about changing someone's mind on theology. It's just about learning how to love your gay child and seeing things differently instead of condemning and using Bible verses. And so it was just a way to help parents who are really struggling with this, that then in turn helps kids or LGBTQ adults, even anybody who's going through, this. But I wanted to go to the conference and be a part of it. And one of the people who really sponsored it is also a donor on our film. And when we were discussing whether or not 1946 would be able to participate, 1946 works on affirming theology, where unconditional is kind of like, they call themselves the quiet middle or something like that, where they don't really want to push either side. Again, it's not about yes, it's Bible based. Yes, it's, and so then to that end, they're affirming queer people and saying to the parents to love them and accept them. But then they still say that the Bible is between a man and a woman. So it's a little confusing, but at the same time, it's also like, so this is going on the same time that I'm in Atlanta for our film festival presentation in Atlanta. And you're there at the thing, and I'm like, I just went to the conference the day before. I'm telling you about it after we see the movie at the film festival. And I'm like, yeah, and tomorrow Andy Stanley is supposed to be giving this historical sermon And it's a private, at first, screening. Like, they didn't live cast it. They turned all the cameras off. They filmed, and then they later released it. But he wanted to have a conversation with his congregation because he was getting so much pushback from the evangelical community for hosting this event. And they're saying he's affirming, it's this slippery slope, all the things. And they're turning against Andy. And to that end, they had the sermon that you and I did go to. So I'm like, look, we got to go to this, right? So you and I find our way to going to this church, and we had friends there because I was a part of the conference, and I know the people the organizers of it, and some of the donors of it, and things like that. And so we get shuttled in to see the sermon, and there were spies, I guess, from the evangelical world in there, filming it, recording it. So within an hour of it being of his first sermon, they had already released it. And it's a scratchy, somebody was recording it from their phone. Who knows where they were, and see Andy Stanley is contradicting himself because he said one thing on Thursday and a different thing here. Is he affirming? Is he not? Whatever. But it just seems like noise. It's like we're teaching people how to love one another. And anyway, but you and I were sitting in there, and Andy did say something that you and I did shoot a look to one another, didn't really agree, and find ourselves as LGBTQ Christians in that sticky spot where it's like, we're a little bit more than welcome at that church, but it's still not there.
I want to talk about this gray area. I think that, I think it could be good sometimes for people who are on the opposite side, if we want to say black. If we're going to go from black to gray, because I feel like white is love. Yeah. I would say white, light, just be loving, right? But I think that if you're on that love, I don't understand. Is the gray area love the sin or hate the sin? Because I don't like that. Because that feels wrong each time.
No, that would be the black area.
That's the
love
black
the sin or hate the sin.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the gray area still might fall into that and have some of that residual type of understanding, but be a little bit more understanding where that doesn't feel very well. And it's like, and then maybe be pulling away to understand that LGBTQ is not a sin.
Right. Yes.
So I think the gray area, there's a little bit more room there, but yeah.
It's definitely a step up from love the sinner, hate the sin. Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, listen, I mean, I know a lot of people had a lot of opinions about that, and I won't get into that, but I thought it was interesting that you mentioned the book being a little bit of the reason, like, it's an interesting little reason that kind of like how that came up.
It all circles back to Andy Stanley.
Yeah, somehow. It all comes back to Andy Stanley.
He's still not there. I wish that he didn't say some of the things he said in that sermon, but I can't imagine the amount of pressure he's under being a leader of a congregation that size and really trying to do the right thing that he feels is in his heart and for his community and for the world, really, not just the people in his church, but for people who struggle with a lot of different issues around, anyway. So I can't imagine the pressure he's under. So
yeah, it's a lot, because a lot of times people look from the outside, and a lot of times people have all these opinions about us and as people, as what we do and how we do it. And, like even people can look at your film and they can say, oh, well, she's this way or she's that way. And that's the reason, like, I guess that's why I asked you in the beginning, like, what was your motivation? Because people can assume one thing. Like, I even had my own thoughts as to what your motivation was. And now, obviously I really know, what it was. But like, people can assume so many things. And so I think it's lovely that that we're able to kind of step outside of that.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. I'm just grateful that we had an opportunity to be there at that historic moment, because when would I ever really just go to Andy Stanley's church? You know what I mean? Like, it was wild.
I haven't been to a church like that before in my life, and I've been to many churches, but that place was like, it was like Disney World. It was so big. It was so large.
Oh, totally.
It was definitely an experience.
It's unbelievable.
And it's crazy because, like I said,
Church America.
Really, really, truly. And like, it's crazy because, like I said, it's like one thing after the other with the synchronicity, and just like even being there and the fact that it happened that way, I just thought was lovely.
I think that there's so many people who are hurting and who take things that like they read or that they're told by other Christians so to heart that it ruins their personal relationships.
Yeah.
And what I did hear from him was a lot of like, have empathy for your gay child. And so I'll give it that. You know, Tiff just said to me like, well, have you talked to him? And I said, no. And she's like, well, why don't we do it right now? Why don't we do it right now? Ask him for an interview. And I said, no, I don't want to. I said, I don't want to. I actually don't want to. Actually, I said it and I feel it, and this is how I feel about it, is true. You know, I heard a lot of, I sat in an interesting group of people after that service, people who were like very close to him, people who had conversations with him about what he was going to say that day. And I heard a lot about fear, and I heard a lot of fear. I did. And then I walked to that place and I saw it, and I think maybe I understood a little bit about the fear. And so I'll say when Andy Stanley's ready to talk to me, we can talk. And I feel like I'm in the church registry. It shouldn't be hard to find. You can call me. We can have a chat, whatever. But like, we can sit down and mash it out. But I guess my question is, and I think that this is probably everybody's question, which is like, is it hot or cold, or is it lukewarm that like we have to spit it out?
Yeah. Yeah, well, my only concern with someone, especially in the church, especially someone that has a platform, is that they're not using a message to pander. And that's where, like, that's, I think, a little bit of where I'm fearful.
Yeah.
Like,
is it gray area? Is it wishy-washy? Is it?
Because if it's gray, you're sort of pandering so you can sort of bring people in that you want to. Is it in the name of relevance? Is it in the name of growing the numbers of your church? What is it about?
But what about this? What about this? Actually, this is an idea. What about this? What if gray's not bad? What if gray stretches to both sides, where you have people who are maybe gonna like totally be like, again, I'll say like the white side, like the side of like just pure white light, like I'm gonna love everybody no matter what, I love everything, everybody, blah blah blah. And then you have people who are maybe like staunch, hard, the black side of things, like no, love the sinner, love the sinner, hate the sin, you gotta get out of my house and all that kind of stuff, What if the gray area allows people who are on that side, on that dark side, to venture into something that's not as horrible?
Yeah.
And so maybe, and I'm just kind of like trying to see it from the other side here.
Yeah.
But like maybe it's a good thing to be able to open up the conversation to people who would have before just been like, no.
Right.
No.
And that's where like my big question comes from, where it's like, how authentic and genuine is it? Like, do you really mean to continue to drive the conversation, or was it just like, oh, let me throw this out there? So like, I guess that we just have to sit and wait, maybe?
I guess we have to judge a tree by its fruit, right?
Yeah, we have to sit and wait to see where it goes. So the conversation keeps going, and it goes like further and further until those people that are on there like, no, like I hate I love the sinner, hate the sin, like come over to where it's like, you know what, you are accepted. But teach me, like, how do I get to know you? It's just, I think most people that are on the opposite side is because they don't know. And so that drives fear. So people fear what they don't know and understand. That's where the key is. Like, when people fear something, it's because they don't know it, they don't understand it, and they've refused to get to know what they fear. Like, you can't get over fear until you actually are willing to get to know what you fear and get to understand what you fear. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah. I mean, maybe I'm feeling a little bit sentimental today, and so maybe it's just a today thing, and I'm going to give myself grace for how I feel in the future and how I felt in the past. But for today, the 12th of February 2025, I will say I think maybe it could be a good thing. Because I think about just the Andy Stanley thing. Are we, I think that maybe, I found out, basically, in a way, he's the reason for that movie.
Ah, got it.
He's the reason.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting.
Yeah.
When you think about it, and I think, you judge a tree by its fruit, right? We could do like Jesus said. And so I think about the fruit. I think about, the conversation I had with Sam Park. I think, okay, well, this is interesting. So I guess we'll see. God is God, and I'm not, but I think we'll see. And I guess we'll talk to Andy when Andy's ready. Don't be scared.
Yeah.
You don't have to be scared of me, Andy. I won't bite you. We will hear more from Rocky in a later episode of Loving Kindness Every Day. So stay tuned. Before we go.
So yeah, like if we're interested, we want to watch the movie, we want to support the movie. How do we do that? Give us the plugs. Tell us what do we do? What do we want to know more about?
The best way to support us, follow us on social media at 1946 the movie. We're on all social media platforms. You can find that info on our website. Everything's linked on our website, 1946themovie.com, where you can find our linked tree, which has extended resources and all of the links to find what festival we're at, where we're going to be showing the movie live, where you can rent the movie online, and things like that.
Check out kindnesscalloway.com and click the shop tab to support the show. Shop Bentley Fortune and use coupon code KINDNESSTHEKID. Share this with your friends and anyone else who will listen. Take a deep breath and enjoy yourself today.
Are like about the making of this film that's been divine. Anything that has been divinely guided.
There have been so many things that have just aligned with the film that would fall under this category, where it's just like, where did that come from? How did that happen? And it's just like an aha moment. It can't be anything less than a God moment, right? And so many of them along the way, I mean, including even meeting you, it's just the synchronicity, right? So it was in Los Angeles, and I'd purchased a couple cameras at that point at the beginning of the process out of my own pocket. And I had this older camera that shot HD, and it wasn't gonna, we didn't really need it. And I had excess, and I could probably only get a couple $100 for it. But I'm like, you know what? I woke up one morning, literally just woke up, and I was like, I'm ready to sell my Rebel 2000, camera that does stills and video and this and that. All the specs. I went through the specs in my head, and I woke up and I was about to do a post. And about an hour later, my friend Laura Beth sent me a text message, and she said, hey, Rocky, I know you're living in LA. I'm looking for a camera to shoot some church videos, and I'm thinking a Rebel 2000, all the specs that were exactly what my camera was. This is the camera that I want. So instead of putting it up for $200, I spent $14 to give it to her. I said, I have that camera. What's your address? I put it in the mailbox. I spent $14, gave her the camera. That night, I went to a gay Christian Bible study in Toluca Lake, California. And after, during the break or snacks or whatever we do at gay Christian Bible study, one of the guys came up to me and said, hey, the Lord's been speaking to me, and I really had this vision, like this, I need to help you. And I have $500 with that help. Yeah. So I got more than double what we were going to, what I was going to get for the camera just by giving it away. But I mean,
whoa.
I woke up, I got the text. I was like, what? Yeah.
Whoa. Wow. That blows me away. I love that story. I love that story for so many reasons. I love it's like give and it's given back to you. Like you were like, I could sell this camera. Instead, you chose
I need the money.
Yeah, you needed the money. You already called out like $200. You're like, listen, I could use this $200. We've all And instead, you're like, spent $14. And then look, boom, straight away, it comes right back. I actually, that's so encouraging to me. I just love that you shared that with me. That's wow.
kindnesscalloway.com and click the fortune and use coupon code KINDNESSTHEKID. Share this with your friends and anyone else who will listen. Take a deep breath and enjoy yourself today.